So imagine, if you will, an ancient Egyptian pitch meeting.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall for that.
Right, because you have this incredibly powerful king, and he's demanding a new monument. And he wants something that projects absolute authority, like something with a really strong, imposing personality.
Yeah.
And he tells his lead sculptor that he needs an idea that is just completely out of the box.
Or, out of the sarcophagus, as the case may be.
Exactly. That is exactly the vibe. So picture this lead sculptor. He is stressed out. He is completely overworked. I mean, he's probably running on whatever the ancient Egyptian equivalent of espresso was.
Which I'm sure was potent.
Oh, absolutely. Because he just finished pulling double shifts, building a massive pyramid. He hasn't slept. He is staring at this giant lump of limestone out in the desert, and he just pitches the first crazy thing that pops into his head.
Just desperation.
Complete. He's like, look, boss, what if we take your head and we just put it on a giant lion's body? And boom, the Sphinx is born.
I mean, it is a really humorous way to visualize it, but it actually captures the sheer audacity of the monument. Like, you have to consider what a massive architectural leap that was for the time.
Yeah, and if you go to the Giza Plateau today, you'll see, millions of tourists taking those classic forced perspective photos. You know the ones.
Where it looks like they're kissing the Sphinx.
Yes, or
Yeah.
putting sunglasses on it. But if you stop and ask anyone in that crowd what they're actually looking at, almost no one knows its true identity.
No, they don't.
Like, is it a god? Is it a king? Was it sitting there before the pyramids were even built, or did it come after? So for this deep dive, we are stripping away the myths. We're looking at the hard archaeological and geological facts to solve what is essentially the ultimate ancient whodunit.
It really is a detective story spanning 5 millennia. But to even ask who built it, we first have to understand how we know it exists at all. Because, well, for massive chunks of human history, the Sphinx was just completely swallowed by the desert.
Swallowed whole.
Yeah. The sand is a relentless force in Egypt.
Right, so let's go way back to the story of Thutmose IV to see just how relentless. Because long before he was a pharaoh, he was just a prince out on a hunting expedition in the north.
Just a royal guy out hunting.
Exactly. And he gets exhausted from the desert heat, obviously, and he decides to take a nap in the only shade he can find, which just so happens to be under the shadow of the Sphinx's head.
Right.
And the head is the absolute only part of the monument visible above the sand at this point.
Yeah, the entire 240-foot body of the lion is just buried under tons of earth. So to Prince Thutmose, it is literally just this massive, disembodied human head sticking out of the desert floor, staring into the horizon.
Which is such a wild image. So Thutmose falls asleep in that shadow, and he has a dream. And in the dream, the Sphinx actually speaks to him.
Very convenient dream.
Very convenient. And tells him, I'm suffocating in the sand. If you clear the sand from my body, I promise you will become a great and powerful king.
Wow.
So Thutmose wakes up, gets his workers, clears all the massive dunes away, builds protective walls around the perimeter, and then he leaves this giant granite slab.
A dream steel.
Right, the dream seal, right between its front paws to document the entire divine encounter.
It's an incredible narrative, really. But
Yeah.
you have to look a little closer at the political context of the time. Thutmose IV was not the uncontested first-in-line heir to the throne. He had older brothers.
Oh, which turns this whole divine dream thing into a brilliantly executed political campaign ad.
Exactly.
I mean, if you want to bypass the traditional line of succession, what better way to justify your right to rule to the public than to announce that the giant ancient sand god literally spoke to you and personally selected you to be the next king?
It is an absolute masterclass in ancient propaganda. But from an archaeological perspective, the dream steel is significant for a completely different reason. Yeah, it marks the first recorded excavation of the Sphinx.
Yeah.
It proves that even back then, thousands of years ago, to the ancient Egyptians themselves, this monument was already an ancient buried mystery. They were excavating their own history.
That is so cool, the ancients doing ancient archaeology.
Right.
And they kept at it, too, because about 100 years after Thutmose, Ramses II comes along and does some minor restorations on the statue. Although Ramses had a very practical, somewhat ruthless approach to monuments.
He really did.
Like, he literally took granite casing stones right off of Khafre's pyramid to go build his own temple in Memphis.
Yeah, he was a prolific builder, but he frequently cannibalized older structures to fund his own projects. And because he had that reputation for repurposing stones, later Egyptologists had a tendency to just blame Ramses for any damage or missing pieces they found on the Sphinx.
Oh, like a scapegoat?
Yeah, if a stone was gone, they just assumed he probably took it.
But despite Thutmose IV's protective walls and Ramses' patchwork, I mean, the desert always wins. The sand just kept pouring back into the basin, completely erasing the Sphinx from historical memory over and over again.
It's cyclical.
Yeah, and you'd think a monument that massive would be impossible to lose, right? But the sand was so relentless that when the world's most famous ancient historian visited, he literally didn't even see it.
This is one of my favorite details.
It's crazy. The Greek historian Herodotus visits Egypt around 525 BC. He writes pages and pages detailing the pyramids of Giza, but he completely ignores the Sphinx.
Not a single mention in his expansive chronicles.
How do you miss a giant lion man sitting right next to the pyramids? Like if you were to travel to Paris, write a comprehensive book about a lovely park you walked through, and completely fail to mention the Eiffel Tower towering over you.
People would definitely question your observation skills.
Exactly. They'd think you were blind.
It seems impossible when we picture the Giza Plateau today, but the archaeologist Salim Hassan proposed a highly logical explanation for Herodotus's blind spot.
Okay, what was it?
The sand dunes, combined with the protective mud brick walls built during earlier eras to hold the desert back, were simply so high that they completely obstructed the view.
Wow.
Yeah. Herodotus didn't write about it because he quite literally couldn't see it. It was an invisible monument.
Just completely swallowed up. And then, well, the Romans later dug it out, right? And they used it as a pagan pilgrimage site until about the 4th century AD. But then the empire shifted, the site was abandoned, and the sand just reclaimed it all over again.
This cycle of burial and rediscovery really highlights the fragility of history. I mean, this structure went from being the ultimate central manifestation of the sun god to a forgotten rock, and eventually to something completely different.
Right.
It shows how our human perception of monuments shifts entirely based on whether we possess the cultural context to understand them.
Oh, and the evolution of the monument's name is the perfect example of that shifting context. Like Thutmose IV called it Khepri Riatum. Amenhotep II called it Hormaket.
Right.
And these are just different ancient names for the sun god Ra. Like Khepri represents the morning sun, Ra is the noon sun, and Atum is the evening sun. So they understood exactly what it was meant to represent.
They held a deep theological understanding of the monument's purpose. But watch what happens to the language as the centuries pass, and that specific religious context just kind of fades from the local memory.
It turns into a millennia-long game of telephone.
Exactly.
Because Seti I's temple inscriptions referred to it as Hormaket, but over time that ancient Egyptian word mutated in the local dialects into the word hall, and then the Arab armies arrive in Egypt, and they don't know the ancient theology of the sun god. They just look out into the desert and see this massive, heavily weathered, terrifying face staring out of the sand.
That must have been imposing.
So they add the word Abu to it, calling it Abu Ahol, which translates to the father of dread, or the father of terror, and I guess some even called it Balhib.
From the divine, life-giving morning sun to the father of terror. The physical limestone didn't change at all, but the meaning was entirely rewritten by the people looking at it.
It's wild. But let's fast forward to the 1800s. The French expedition arrives in Egypt. They are fascinated by this head sticking out of the sand, so they try to excavate it, but they eventually just give up.
It's tough work.
Yeah, I mean, digging in deep sand is like trying to dig a hole in water, you know? It just keeps rushing back in to fill the space. But crucially, their scholar, Jean-François Champollion, manages to decode the Rosetta Stone.
A huge moment.
Passive, unlocking the ancient Egyptian language, which totally blows the doors open for future discoveries.
That linguistic breakthrough really sets the stage for the physical breakthroughs, because in 1816, an Italian sea captain named Giovanni Battista Caviglia decides he is going to be the one to finally unearth the Sphinx.
And he takes a massive, life-threatening risk to do it. Oh, entirely.
He digs this incredibly dangerous sheer trench right down through the shifting sands, aiming straight for the Sphinx's shoulder.
Oh, right. Right.
Like the sand could have collapsed at any second and buried him alive.
It was incredibly foolish, but brave.
But the gamble paid off. He discovered pieces of the Sphinx's original carved braided beard, which, fun fact, are now sitting in the British Museum.
Naturally.
Right. And he found a completely buried temple sitting right in front of the Sphinx's paws, known as the Sphinx Temple.
So Caviglia's dangerous excavation is what finally re-exposes the physical body to the modern world. But the defining mystery of the Sphinx isn't just its shifting name or the constant battle with the sand.
No.
It is the fierce, sometimes really wild debate among scientists over who actually carved it and when.
The real whodunit of the Giza Plateau. So the standard theory, which was championed by the famous 19th century Egyptologist Gaston Maspero, is that it is King Khafre.
Right.
It's Khafre's face sitting directly in front of his own pyramid, guarding his tomb for eternity. And that became the consensus for a long time, because it aligns perfectly with the visual geography of the plateau. But, in archaeology, the consensus is always subject to new evidence.
Always. Because in 2004, archaeologist Vasil Dobrev presented a really compelling counter-theory. He argued that it is not Khafre's face at all, but rather Khufu's face, the king who built the Great Pyramid.
Right.
And Dobrev pointed to the architecture of the site to prove it. He noted that Khafre's causeway, which is the elevated walkway leading to his pyramid, was actually built around the Sphinx.
Which is a huge detail.
Yeah.
Like if you were the architect planning a massive symmetrical temple complex from scratch, you don't awkwardly route your pathways to avoid a statue.
Yeah.
You only do that if the statue is already sitting there in your way.
Dobrev's structural logic makes a lot of sense, honestly. He suggests that Jedrefri, who was Khufu's son, actually commissioned the Sphinx to immortalize his father as a sun god.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it frames the monument as a grand gesture of filial piety. Just a son giving his dad a 5,000-year-long memorial. Not bad. But if you look at earlier theories, like Heinrich Brugsch in the 19th century, he claimed that Khufu actually saw the Sphinx while he was building the Great Pyramid.
Right.
And if Khufu saw it, that means the Sphinx predates the pyramids entirely.
Which naturally opens the door for the most controversial theory of all.
Oh, here we go.
In 1990, a geologist named Robert Schoch analyzed the monument and pointed to the heavy, vertical erosion marks running down the limestone body of the Sphinx. He stated that this specific type of erosion is caused by water damage, specifically heavy, sustained rainfall.
Right, and since Egypt hasn't experienced heavy, sustained rainfall since the end of the last ice age, Schoch argued the Sphinx must be at least 10,000 years old.
Exactly.
Which is wild. Schoch also pointed out a glaring issue with the statue's proportions. Like, if you stand back and look at it, the human head of the Sphinx is noticeably too small for the massive lion body.
It really is disproportionate.
Yeah, so he claimed it was originally a giant lioness head, carved 10,000 years ago, and that these later Egyptian pharaohs selfishly chiseled it down, recarving it into their own human face. I mean, it is a theory that feels tailor-made for a Hollywood script.
It definitely has a strong cinematic appeal, which is why it caught fire in pop culture.
Yeah.
But as a geological anomaly, it requires us to ignore an overwhelming amount of context.
Exactly, because you have to look at the surrounding environment. How could there be massive, sustained rain erosion on one single statue right in the middle of a totally arid desert, while the pyramids sitting mere feet behind it, which are supposedly younger, don't show that same heavy water damage?
That's the glaring issue.
Right. And furthermore, if an advanced civilization existed 10,000 years ago with the engineering capability to carve a 240-foot limestone monolith, where are they?
Yeah.
You don't build something that massive and leave behind zero pottery, zero tools, and zero graves.
The broader community of Egyptologists overwhelmingly rejects Schoch's timeline for that exact reason. Yeah. You cannot practice geology in a vacuum. You have to balance the rock formations with the archaeological footprint.
Right. But if we dismiss the Ice Age rain theory, we still have to answer a very difficult question. Because the vertical fissures and water damage on the Sphinx's body are real. They are physically there.
Yes, they are.
So if it wasn't 10,000-year-old rain pouring from the sky, what on earth is eating away at this statue?
So, to solve the erosion mystery, we turn to the groundbreaking research of Dr. Mark Lehner. He didn't just look at the weathering on the statue. He analyzed the geological history of the Earth beneath it.
Right. Lehner zooms all the way out and looks at the Giza Plateau 50 million years ago, which is hard to even fathom. But back then, that entire geographic area was a massive body of water, like a shallow lagoon.
Hard to imagine now.
Very. And over millions of years, as that water dried up, it left behind dense, distinct layers of limestone, absolutely packed with ancient marine fossils.
And this fundamentally changes how we need to conceptualize the Sphinx. We usually imagine ancient monuments being built from the ground up, dragging block after block into place, much like the pyramids.
But the Sphinx wasn't built, it was carved.
Exactly.
The ancient engineers found this giant natural outcropping of limestone bedrock sticking up out of the plateau. They carved the head from the rock exposed above ground, and then they dug a massive U-shaped trench deeply down into the earth to carve out the lion's body.
Yeah.
And they didn't waste the material either. The massive multi-ton limestone blocks they excavated from that trench were dragged right next door and used to build the Sphinx temple.
And the geometry of that U-shaped trench is the key to solving the water damage.
Yeah.
Because the Sphinx is essentially an exposed piece of the Earth's porous bedrock sitting down inside a carved-out limestone basin.
Which leads to what we call the sponge theory. Because it sits down in that basin, the porous limestone of the Sphinx's body acts just like a giant 50-million-year-old kitchen sponge.
Right.
Like, if you take a dry paper towel and dip just the bottom corner into a glass of water, you watch the water defy gravity and travel up the paper. That is capillary action.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks. And the Sphinx does the exact same thing. It is quietly, continuously soaking up groundwater from the water table below.
It is a brilliant, scientifically sound mechanism. The groundwater is pulled up deep into the stone, and as the moisture eventually evaporates in the intense desert sun, the microscopic salt crystals left behind inside the rock begin to expand.
Oh, wow.
And as they expand, they pop and flake off the outer layers of the limestone. That capillary action is what causes the continuous, heavy, vertical erosion on the body.
So it wasn't ancient Ice Age rain falling from the sky?
No, it was the Earth itself, slowly dissolving the statue from the inside out.
It is quite literally a giant sponge sitting in a puddle, quietly soaking up groundwater while everyone is looking up at the sky arguing about the rain.
It perfectly reconciles the geological reality of water damage with the established historical timeline of ancient Egypt. And Liener's work went beyond just geology.
Right.
Based on the archaeological evidence scattered around the site, including the pieces of the beard Caviglia found, he reconstructed what the original Sphinx would have looked like to those who carved it.
And it wasn't this sandy, monochromatic, weathered rock we see today. It had a prominent nose. It had a braided, divine, pharaonic beard, which we know from the pigment traces was painted a vibrant red.
Yeah.
The headdress was likely striped in bright blue and yellow. The whole statue was painted in striking, brilliant colors that would have just gleamed in the desert sun.
It would have been a dazzling, imposing sight. But Liener also provided what many consider the definitive proof of the Sphinx's identity.
This part is so cool.
He compared the facial features and the thematic elements of the Sphinx to a highly durable green diorite statue of King Khafre that was found in the nearby Valley Temple, which was the reception area used for the king's mummification and cult rituals.
Right. And if you look at that green diorite statue from the front, you just see King Khafre sitting rigidly on his throne. But if you walk around to the back of the statue, you see the falcon god, Horus, perched directly behind Khafre's head, wrapping his wings forward to cradle and protect the king.
It's beautiful.
It visually proves that, to the ancient Egyptians, the mortal king on earth and the divine god in the sky were two sides of the exact same coin. They were inseparable.
Which brings us to the most profound revelation of Leonard's research.
Oh.
The astronomical alignment.
Yes.
Twice a year, precisely on the spring and autumn equinoxes. If you stand in the right spot at the edge of the Sphinx temple, the setting sun aligns perfectly with the Sphinx's right shoulder.
And the right shoulder is deeply significant because in Egyptian iconography, the shoulder is the exact spot where the wing of the falcon god, Horus, would sprout.
It synthesizes all the fragmented findings perfectly. The astronomical alignment with the sun, combined with the theological meaning of the diorite statue, beautifully proves that the Sphinx is not just a stone guardian. It is a physical architectural manifestation of Ra-Hormuzd, the sun god on the horizon. It is an ancient, interactive astronomical calendar carved directly into the bedrock of the Earth.
When you pull all these threads together, thanks to the cumulative, painstaking work of scientists like Mark Lenner and explorers like Caviglia with his dangerous trench, and preservationists like the French restorer Émile Barrès, who literally secured the heavy head with cement in the 1920s when it was deeply cracked and threatening to snap off entirely, we finally have the real story of the Sphinx.
We do, and it reflects a deeply poignant reality about archaeology. The slow, methodical piecing together of these ancient clues is, well, it's the closest thing human beings currently have to time travel.
That's a great way to look at it.
You really have to admire the long-term vision of these ancient rulers. Khufu and Khafre's decision to build these sprawling stone complexes was the ultimate long-term investment. They created a massive architectural deposit in the desert that has continuously paid out dividends of wonder, tourism, and knowledge to every single civilization that has lived in or visited Egypt for the last 5,000 years.
It really is the most successful public works project in human history.
Truly.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to ponder the next time you look at a photograph of an ancient ruin. We talked about Robert Schoch's highly contested theory, the idea that the Sphinx originally had a massive lioness head that was later chiseled down and recarved into a human face to suit the ego of a later pharaoh.
Right, a theory soundly rejected regarding the Ice Age timeline, certainly.
Yeah, the timeline is absolutely out. But the concept of ancient recycling, the idea that an ancient ruler would happily modify an existing masterpiece to claim it for themselves, leaving a disproportionate head on a massive body.
That raises a fascinating point.
It does. Because if the head of the Sphinx really was altered to hide an older, entirely different face, what other world-famous ancient monuments are hiding completely different original identities right in plain sight, just waiting for someone to look closely enough?
A monumental case of identity theft. It really makes you question everything you see carved in stone.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the sands of time. Keep digging, keep questioning, and we will see you on the next deep dive.